So, Rich, what do you think is next for organizations? What does the future hold for organizations?
Companies have done a reasonable job in terms of getting people to feel like they belong. I think they've done a terrible job at valuing someone's uniqueness. And that's something we need to work on as an academic profession, to get the evidence behind it and then be able to communicate that to companies. So I see that as being a big area of improvement.
Welcome to International Business Today, where we discuss the most critical issues in international business with top academic experts and thought leaders. I'm Paula Caligiuri, a professor in International Business and Strategy Group at Northeastern University's DeMoore McKim School of Business, the sponsor of this podcast. Today, I am so happy to be joined by Rich Griffith. Rich is a professor and the executive director of the Institute for Culture, Collaboration, and Management at Florida Tech. Rich is also known for his work in global talent management and also in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. A fun fact, Rich is not only a leading academic in cross-cultural management, he's also the lead guitarist for the internationally acclaimed surf punk band, The Balboas. Rich, welcome to International Business Today.
Thank you, Paula.
It is so exciting to have you here, Rich. You and I have been working in the same area for a long time in cross-cultural management. And then more recently, I think we've both seen executives, companies interested in the ways in which cross-cultural management and what we've learned from cross-cultural management applies to this critical area of diversity, equity, inclusion. What are you seeing as the overlap between the two?
To me, the crux of the issue is the notion of the categorization people make when they meet someone who's different. So some years ago, I remember just sitting at the beach having a cup of coffee, and it hit me, wait a minute, culture's not real. It's an abstraction we've made up to describe why you behave differently when you come from Chicago and I behave a certain way when I come from Shanghai. But it's not like air and water. It's not real. So those differences are the most salient differences or salient categorization that humans make. And when they do, they start to process information in different places in the brain. And that has consequences. And those categorizations are the same, whether it's an international diversity that's occurring or national diversity, or the color of your skin or your sex or your age. You get categorized as same and different. And we might have been looking for different solutions, but at the end of the day, it might be one more robust solution that will help us out rather than looking for a number of ways to fix what were viewed as a number of problems.
Yeah, it is so critical, isn't it? When you think about how we have our what we were calling culture, it's not just, you were born in the U.S., therefore you are, or you were born in China, therefore you are. It's you've been socialized. You've been socialized by your education, your family, your generation, your profession, and those keep layering on to give you the values that you have. So I think we're both kind of landing in the same place, that the cross-cultural management work is really important for that diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So if you could tell, what are you seeing in terms of how companies are integrating these two?
Well, to be honest, I don't think they are yet. I still think we're sort of at the cutting edge of this change that is occurring. There are other people. I see Ernie Gunling that's doing this, and Milton Bennett is starting to have this kind of conversation. So it's becoming a dominant theme. But companies haven't caught on yet. You have your folks that are working with expatriates and they're talking about culture. And then you have your HR professionals that are talking about DE&I. And they're not talking to each other. So they're not leveraging resources. They're not leveraging lessons learned to get any better. And I think that's going to make for slow progress. To be fair, academics are doing the same thing. So you have people that study diversity, you have people that study culture, and there's a dozen other professions that are out there that are, following the same pattern, and they're not having conversations and really discovering where they can leverage each other's successes.
Yeah. Well, you and I both do a lot of work in organizations, and I think we've been following the same track, and I think our tracks are something like this. As you noted, we began, and a lot of our work was with global mobility leaders, and then I think we started to see all of the global leadership development, global talent development folks kind of jumping into this understanding of cultural agility, right? And now we're starting to see the DEI folks getting very involved. I know I'm getting a lot of calls for diversity, equity, inclusion work, and I'm sure you are too, because that is so, so critical. But it also, I think, and maybe you're seeing this as well, diversity, equity, inclusion done from the lens of culture sort of is an easier conversation because we can talk about socializing agents.
Yeah, it's very true. I think now that's a sensitive topic to have. And you can get into an argument really quickly. But if you're talking about what are differences, and these can be a variety of different kinds of differences, then people will push back right away. So I think that there is some language that we can be using that makes this easier to message to not only executives, but what is the general public about DE&I.
Yeah, we do an exercise with both my executives and also my MBA students, even my undergrads, and we have them actually look at sort of where they are on value distribution, whether you're formal or informal, whether you're direct or indirect in communication. And then they see where they're same or different with their classmates or colleagues from different cultures. And it's always interesting when people are the same on a certain value, but from a different nationality or a different generation, and then having them talk about how they got there, like how was that value socialized? What are you seeing in terms of how they're integrating?
One of the things that's really neat is you can experimentally manipulate sameness and differentness, and you can actually see that people that have been put into the category as the same will bond more, and they don't have the sort of tribal behavior that occurs even when the difference is not real, when it's been manipulated. So it's a really deep-seated, hardwired portion of our brain that we're fighting against when we start working with people that are different than us, which is every day now. And it might not be a different race or a different culture, but it might be a different profession or a different educational background or different levels of power or socioeconomic status that you have to navigate.
Yeah. One of the best skills whenever I'm asked, what's the most important skill for global leaders or cross-cultural leaders or people have to work in diverse environments, I always say it's the ability to find similarity quickly. And I don't care if it's, whatever, coming from or having the same experience, enjoying the same food, whatever it might be, that's always the most critical because as soon as our brains register similarity, we register trust.
Agreed.
And I think we both see that. So when it's not going right, Rich, what are you seeing in organizations when it is mismanaged, when that DEI is not managed well?
Well, there's definitely business outcomes, but I think those problems can be even larger. So I'll just give you an example of one. So you've heard about the great economic crisis that occurred in 2008. My European friends just call it the crisis. And if you take a look at that, we should have recovered from it faster than we did. But the data would show that there was a shortage of global leaders that could drive international business. But there wasn't. There was a shortage of men who were in those roles. There were plenty of women that were qualified, but they were having a difficult time to move into what were executive roles, particularly top executive roles. And the ones that did had to face a lot of animosity, a lot of toxicity, a lot of abuse. And they, for the most part, just walked away and said, that's it, I'm done. I don't want any more of this. Okay, we're in another economic crisis now. People are talking about their engagement in the workplace and quiet quitting and all of that stuff. But the
great resignation.
Right. The employment statistics are horrible right now, which means we need leaders. We're going to need people to drive business again, and women aren't going to come back. They've just taken that kind of abuse and they're done. And we created a problem that we didn't need to have, and this could be a generation-long problem before we solve that. So it's not just dollars at the end of the day. These problems are large societal problems that you don't see coming. And because of the sort of traditional viewpoints that executives have had, they've created a monster that's going to be really tough to tackle.
Yeah. So what could companies be doing differently? What should they be doing? Or have you seen any great examples of ones that are doing it well?
Yeah, I would. So the first thing I would say, is, before we even go, what should you do right, is what should you stop doing now? And that's implicit bias training. It is a scam. There's $8 billion a year that is spent on implicit bias training, and it doesn't work. In fact, it can make the problems worse.
Yes.
Now, why do people use it? Well, it's CYA. They want to make sure they have some political cover to say that we're doing something so that they could drop their liability when these discrimination lawsuits come, but it doesn't work.
Don't you think, though, there's also that push, like boards are telling HR, you've got to do something about DEI, you've got to do something about DEI, and they've kind of, organizations have gotten on the bandwagon of, okay, we're going to do microaggression, we're going to do unconscious bias, and in fact, like you said, especially with unconscious bias training, we're making things worse.
Yes.
Yeah. So, sorry.
No.
Stream of consciousness.
I mean, that's exactly where I think the conversation we need to be having, because there is some pressure to do something.
Right.
Okay, but what are we going to do? And it's often not evidence-based. It is a Band-Aid on a problem that we're having. But we do have good evidence. So when you think about organizational change, it's got to happen multi-level. We think about multi-level solutions that are multi-pronged. And if you want to address an issue like DE&I, you have to have strategic initiatives, you have to have operational initiatives, you have to have tactical initiatives. So
tell us about those, yeah.
I will. So we're working with Johnson & Johnson now, and I think they've got a really nice line on this. So at a strategic level, one of the things that we're seeing them do is really looking at what is the experience that people are having at particular touch points as they're moving through their organizational life. And you start to see what are the experiences you want people to have. There's a great framework out there now called optimal distinctiveness. And what it says is essentially people want to feel like they belong and they want to feel like their uniqueness is valued. So we can do journey mapping and we can see, for instance, when we onboard something, what actions could we take to make them feel like they belong in the organization? What actions could we take that would let them know that we appreciate their uniqueness?
Can I pause that? Because that's a really important one. The onboarding now, especially in a virtual world when more people are working from home, what that sounds like is really solid socialization to say, hey, you belong here, you're one of us, you're part of us. But how do companies do it when they do it well in a virtual environment?
Well, in a virtual environment, you get stripped of all the sort of nonverbals and the deep interactions that you would have, so your verbal interactions have become really strong. So you mentioned microaggressions earlier, and so for folks who may not be aware of that, these are just comments that in some ways sound like you're trying to be on board with DE&I, but your biases sneak out in your language. The classic one is, I don't see color. And what the person's trying to say is, I'm not racist. But your color matters. And when you say you don't see someone's color, you're stripping them away of their identity and their experiences that they've had. So you might be trying to help them belong, but you're denying them their uniqueness. Lisa Steelman and Jesse Wildman are doing some really great stuff at our institute, and they're looking at something called micro-inclusions, where we can train people to use verbalizations that would hit both of those angles, both the belonging and the uniqueness. And you just get people to kind of embed them in their language. And that's something that I would put into any kind of virtual onboarding. You'd want to be really explicit about the way you're doing that. It's almost scripted in a way, just to make sure that you're hitting on those issues and people are hearing those issues. And then it's not just verbal. You have to actually have actions that follow up on those things, because that's the other problem that organizations have.
So that's at the strategic level is then you had 3 levels.
Yeah, so that one bleeds into tactical a little bit, right. When you get into training. But at an operational level, for example, so implicit bias is real. It's not that there's no implicit bias.
We all have limbic systems,
yes,
right?
we all have bias. It's just that you can't train it away the way that the training is set up. But it does cause problems, and what we want to do at an operational level is think about where are key decisions being made and how do we make them happen in what is controlled processing, where they're deliberate, where we're thinking about them. So for instance, if you're going to appraise someone's performance, if you use what is a behaviorally anchored rating scale, now I have to stop and think about what the person is doing, and I'm going to use a tool, and that's going to bring me into controlled processing. And then bias will still happen, but it's going to happen a lot less when you're in controlled processing than when you're in that automatic processing.
Right. And at the operational level, is this where you'd also enter in things like mindfulness training? Because I know what we've seen with our executives is if we give them more mindfulness training, they tend to kind of slow their limbic processor and can make decisions or use those operational tools more effectively. Is that where that would fit in or no?
Oh, well, I think I would view mindfulness training as more tactical, but all of these elements have to fit together. They've got to dovetail. So if you have systems in place, you're training people how to use those systems in a mindful fashion. Then you're going to get people that are really going to have positive outcomes, that are deliberate, that are thoughtful, that are based on the important elements, which in this case would be performance, rather than where someone is from or what their age is or what their sex is.
Right, right. And then, so what else at the tactical level? Because that's really important.
Yeah, for me, it's about making sure that people have the skills that are necessary. And then, the other element is that people feel empowered to speak about violations that might be problematic. I would say in most toxic cultures, if you're going to look at a culture that has problems with discrimination, they have a lot of other problems. And usually what they're going to do is put pressure on people not to report when problems pop up, particularly if these problems are going to be sexual harassment, or they're going to be even something as serious as sexual assault gets buried. So you want to make sure people feel empowered. They can bring these things forward and say, that doesn't happen here. And you have systems in place, again, at the operational level, that give people voice, that allow them to do that so that they feel safe. They don't feel like they're going to be a victim of retribution. And all those are systems. So when I think operational, I think about those systems. And then when you think about the actions, that's the tactical element. The actions won't happen if the systems aren't in place.
Right.
So you've got to make sure all three levels are covered. And once they are, then you start to see positive change that can occur.
It's really so important to be able to connect everything that has been done and everything that we know about cross-cultural management into diversity, equity, inclusion for these reasons. Are there any organizations that you're working with through the center maybe, or any projects through the center that illustrate that?
Yeah, we do. We work with a lot of folks where this gets really serious. Maybe I'll speak about one, because to me it's the most interesting. So I work with the United States Army Special Forces. They're a small unit. They have to parachute in behind enemy lines, and they have to achieve a mission with what they have in their backpack. That's it. So if they need other ammunition, they need food, they need to make friends in the culture that they're in. So culture to them is not a nice to have, it's a must have. Cultural competence is a must have for those folks. So we work with them to help identify people who are more predisposed, if you will, to learning these sorts of things. So we put together some selection tools for those folks, and then also help them in their training rate people based on their cultural competence rather than on what is the technical performance of their job, which is often what people look at. So you kind of have to look at the soft skills that underlie cross-cultural competence or cultural agility. So we've helped them on both of those ends. And what's great is you're in the field with these soldiers as they're encountering people come from different cultures, and you get to watch them operate, and you get to see whether or not they're going to be any good at this. And some of them are going to be great. Some of them are going to be awful. And they need to get out of training and move into another area, because culture is critical for these folks.
Right. So do you do that through virtual simulations or do you actually go
These
into...
are high fidelity
work,
simulations. Yeah. So the Special Forces go through what is an exercise at the end of their qualification course, or they go into Pineland, which is a fictitious culture, which is the entire southern portion of North Carolina. It's 50,000 square miles.
Wow.
And they encounter people that come from Pineland, but then they also encounter people that are displaced due to war. So you can be walking through an area, and all of a sudden you come across some folks from Djibouti that are growing cannabis and are selling it illegally, and you've got to figure out how you're going to interact with them. You go through a town and you walk into a bar, and it's a Russian bar, and everybody's speaking Russian, and you need to understand not only the language, but the culture if you want to be able to gather information. And if you don't, you're not getting anything from them, and they're going to tell other people in the town. So you're burnt.
Wow.
And you have to move on to gather the information you would need. So it's fantastic.
It's great work you're doing
through
the
cool.
center.
It's really cool.
It is really terrific. So I'm actually so curious. You've done so much work on multicultural teams and global teams. Tell us about that research, and tell us a little bit more about what your center's doing in that area, or what you've been doing in that area from a research perspective.
In a lot of ways, I'm an executive now, so I'm doing less of the primary research. But Jesse Wildman, Amanda Thayer, they're doing fantastic stuff. One of the things they're doing right now, a really cool project, is looking at diversity in the sense of working with non-human entities. So when you think about it, a lot of our coworkers very soon are going to be artificially intelligent entities. And that's a type of diversity.
Right.
You have to build trust with these, or at least you have to have trust.
Have trust, I think, is better than build trust.
Yeah, you may not build trust with these entities, but you have to have trust
Right.
for the team to be able to operate. And those entities are different. They're going to trigger the same thing as when you meet someone who's a different race or a different sex or a different culture. So we've got to figure out how now to help people with a brand new diversity issue. And these will keep coming. There's always going to be changes that will occur. So Jesse and Amanda are working on that with a great Air Force project. Amanda's got this fantastic ARI project, which is like a $20 million
It's the Army Research Institute.
Yeah,
for,
Army
for our
Research
listeners.
Institute. Really great stuff. So all of that is in the area of teams. I learn a little bit just by being involved with them, but in no way am I an expert in the area of teams.
Yeah. It's really such a cool area as well, because what we're seeing in organizations is that they're understanding that individuals need cross-cultural competencies, cultural agility competencies, in order to be effective team members. It's not just because you're going somewhere, because you're working with someone from a different culture. It's actually just working with one another. We're all socialized differently, so we need those competencies. Well, and it's fun to see companies sort of say, yep, yes, here we go, we're doing this. We're going to actually spend some time helping people build those competencies and understanding the science behind it. That's been really, I think, a breakthrough for our field in the past few years.
I mean, I think you know as well as I do, cross-cultural competence skills or cultural agility skills are just good people skills. So listening to someone, withholding judgment when you are having a conversation with them. So I can go on and on. These are just nice people. So they're going to do better in what is a team environment. They're going to do better in any kind of interpersonal area. So these skills, it's not like you're just training someone who's going to go abroad as an expatriate. You can have broader training that will have benefits, even if the person never leaves. If they only work in a domestic setting, they're going to be better at being a teammate.
Yeah. We're also seeing that the multicultural teams, the diverse teams that individuals are on, they themselves become a developmental opportunity. So it's not like our, back when we, I think, started our careers, it was you're training someone for cultural agility competencies because they're going somewhere. And now it's a function of people just working together. They're building those cultural agility competencies. So if you understand sort of what you're good at doing and then what you might need some assistance in developing, you can actually use those just natural experiences that are happening as developmental opportunities.
Yeah, and they're coming back better.
Right.
So, you send someone abroad and you get them ready through some cross-cultural competence training, or you're helping them with their cultural agility. But then they have these really marvelous experiences overseas, and they come back with increased leadership competencies. And then they're able to mentor people that are going abroad. So you just get, in general, professional and personal growth when you're thinking about these things and you're preparing people for the experiences they might have abroad. Yeah,
and as well as those experiences that they're having when they're just working with their colleagues virtually or working with their colleagues, in the next office over. It's making every day, like you said, those good people skills, but great cultural agility competencies. It's helping people get better.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, at least what we're seeing, and I'm sure your group is seeing it as well, that individuals who have those competencies are better at diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations. So it's the perfect marriage of those two areas.
Yeah, they really end up being leaders in those initiatives because they feel it. They've experienced it before. I mean, anybody who's traveled abroad knows what it's like to sit in a bar by yourself and not be able to connect with somebody, and the loneliness that you feel. And when you realize there are people around you that are feeling that same loneliness, even though they could be talking to someone, but they feel pressures not to, then you want to help those people. So I find the folks that have been abroad are good champions in the DE&I space.
Yeah. It's also interesting connecting the two areas. When you see, at least when I give talks on this topic, every now and then I'll have, it's usually an African-American colleague come up and say, wow, I loved working abroad because I felt so... Nobody seemed to notice that I was there. It just felt like I was part of the, leader of the company. I was, an American. It just changed my identity in the eyes of others, which was really different. But the flip side of it, I have had white males come up to me and say, oh my gosh, it was so, it was powerful to work in, China, Japan, wherever. And because this was the first time I understood what it was like to
Yeah.
feel my skin, to be the only one in the room of my demographic, to kind of sense my otherness. So it's really interesting how just the experience of our cross-cultural management work sort of shapes an understanding of DEI work.
I think that's a really good insight, especially when we start thinking about people of color that are having a hard time in the United States. One of the things you have to be aware of is DE&I challenges look differently around the world. So in the United States, it's about race, or that's one of them. There are some challenges around sex as well. But if you go into other places in the world, those things don't matter as much. It might be about what religion are you. So if you happen to be in Poland and you're not Catholic, you're in trouble. Now, you're not going to get a lot of animosity, but you can't connect with people in the same way. So here in Warsaw, I've never been any place that is more Polish or more Catholic than that town. And if you move into other places in the world, it's a different religion that might be there. It might be your name. So if you're in Brazil and you have a certain name, it's going to signify that you're not coming from a family that has influence. You're going to be treated differently because you're going to be a different socioeconomic status. So we tend to think about DE&I in terms of sex and race, but DE&I around the world is going to look very different. And that's another element to this cross-cultural management stuff that we're doing is you have to be aware of not only the dominant culture that you're going in, but who's marginalized in that culture. And how can you work with those people too? And it's a different kind of barrier that you're crossing.
I had to smile when you said about your name meaning something. I was working in northern Italy, and my surname Caligiuri is from southern Italy, but I didn't know that it was apparent that it was southern Italian to a northern Italian.
Oh, yeah.
And there's an animosity
That's a
between
deal.
the northern Italians and the southern
That's a deal.
Italians. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not even from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, that was kind
I
of.
was in Italy maybe 6 months ago, and I was in northern Italy having a really good time. It was fun, met some nice people. Went to southern Italy to see some of my friends, and they said, "Oh, did you have a good time?" I said, "Oh, yeah, it was really wonderful. I had a good time." And they went, "Oh." And I thought, "Uh-oh." I stepped in it, and it took a little while for me to kind of understand why there is that animosity that is there. But there's another beautiful example. What is that based on? That's not based on national origin. It's not based on race. And in many ways, it's based on the closeness of the northern Italians to what is Switzerland. And their behavior is just different than if you were in Sicily or if you were in Salerno or something like that.
Where the weather's much better.
Yeah, much nicer, much nicer.
So, Rich, what do you think is next for organizations? What does the future hold for organizations in this area?
I would like to get back to that notion of optimal distinctiveness. I think that's a powerful tool. Now, that's been around for a while, so that's not the future per se. But what I would say is that companies have done a reasonable job in terms of getting people to feel like they belong. I think they've done a terrible job at valuing someone's uniqueness. And that's something we need to work on as an academic profession to get the evidence behind it and then be able to communicate that to companies. So if I were going to say where there's room to improve in the future, that's the big improvement to me. I don't think it's a hard one to make. I just don't think people have paid attention to it because different matters so much. That we've worked so hard to make people feel they belong, that we haven't really thought about honoring those differences. So I see that as being a big area of improvement.
Yeah, so I think it's both, right? Honoring the differences while finding similarity to build the trust. And once that trust is built, then amplifying the differences so that you can leverage them strategically.
Yeah, there's two parts to that equation. And we've worked on one, and we haven't worked on the other. And I think what might be the next decade, we really got to put some focus in that second half.
Okay, I have to ask. For 20 years, you've been a guitarist for the Balboas. First of all, what have you learned about being, from your team research and all the work you've been doing there on, great global teams, and how did that apply to your punk rock band, the Balboas?
So there's an interesting concept called spillover, where your work life bleeds into your family life, and then your family life bleeds into your work life. And I do think there's a lot of spillover between what I do at the university and then what I do in my music career. So for instance, one of the things that I've learned in both areas, but has affected my music the most, I think, is that you surround yourself with good people, and then you trust them. You don't tell people what to do. You ask them what we should be doing. So my drummer, Dusty Watson, is literally the best drummer in the world. I remember him coming to me in the studio one time and saying, well, Rich, what do you want me to play? And I said, I want you to play what you want to play. Why would I tell you what to be able to play? And I think that is effective coaching and effective teamwork. So, I do that at the Institute as well. So my behavior doesn't look a lot different in many ways. And then I think the other element of punk rock that helped me build the program at Florida Tech and then the Institute is being very efficient with your resources and being resourceful. So when I built that program, we had nothing. So you have to try to achieve what are really big things on a budget of zero. Well, that's punk rock. And so I learned how to do that as a young man and could leverage those skills. And that's motivating for a team, too, when they see that we're not going to be stopped by not having resources. If we had more resources, of course, we could do some bigger things. But they use their resources really well. So at the end of the year, our account comes out to zero.
Wow. But
really on the last day. So we just make sure that we're squeezing as much as we can out of every rock that we have, because if we want to do important things, we got to do that.
That's great leadership, and certainly the center has done amazing things. The Institute has done amazing things.
Thank you. You're very kind.
It's been wonderful. Okay, last question. What piece of advice would you give global professionals who are working internationally?
This is maybe more personal. It may not be as data-driven, but I would say right now, don't give up. The world's a funny place, and globalism has been on a pendulum, and we were way global for a while, and it's come back in. Mm-hmm. And some of that's COVID. We all had to stay in our basements and talk to each other via Zoom, but some of it is kind of the growing nationalism that is going on around the world. It's here in the United States, it's in Europe, it's in South America. Countries are pulling back from the globe, and I get asked all the time, is what you do relevant now? And my take on it is it's more relevant than ever because we have less opportunity to be able to have conversations with each other. We need to get it right. We need to make sure that we're doing it. And then the other element is we have to get ready for when the world's going to be needed again. Now, big problems are coming. I mean, we're one subvariant away from going back to our basement with a new virus. Mm-hmm. Global climate change, all of these big problems. Those are not going to be solved by one country or one company. We're going to need to work together. And if we're not working at getting better at cultural agility, if we're not working to partner across those lines, then we're not going to make it. So we just need to be ready to solve these big problems, and that's going to take all of us, no matter where we're coming from. So I just think the folks that are in this field are feeling a little beat up right now. Mm-hmm. The political climate is not friendly to folks that are doing DE&I work and work in cross-cultural competence or cultural agility. So hang in there, fight the good fight.
It's great advice. It is great advice because you're right. Big problems, complex problems are going to need people who can work collaboratively. So important. Rich, thank you so much for being a part of the show. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for today's episode of International Business Today. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your network. As always, we'd love to hear from you.